Blue Bonds deal, all right? And that is helping for us to create that environment, create the structures and the vision that you just painted in terms of how that is going to happen. And so I'm going to direct this question to Dr. Ricketts from the Belize Fund, who is managing, you're responsible for managing all this money, Dr. Ricketts. So how is the Belize Fund mobilizing that blue finance to support that vision and the marine conservation and community livelihoods for the country?
Right. Thank you, Valdemar. So following up on CEO Wade's comments about our intervention about the government, the Belize Fund is mobilizing blue finance, so through the blue bonds that we have heard about, and that is an anchor investment. So we're at an investment summit talking in terms of investment here. And that anchor investment has enabled us in a short time frame, 3 years, to be able to unlock funding approximately 4.2 million annually. We're unlocking and a total of 180 million US, this is US, over 20 years. And that's coming out of the blue bonds, that conversion directly. So we have this anchor investment. Along with that is an endowment that will be realized 2041 of another 90 million when it matures. So we have been putting that to work. So the fund is a private conservation trust fund. So a big part of the job of the fund is to make sure we get this money on the ground. And we're doing that through a lot of grant making. And so far, in terms of what we have been able to achieve is deploying approximately 20 million Belize. So we're switching from US to Belize. 20 million Belize or 10 million US on the ground. And this has supported marine conservation. It has supported blue businesses. It has supported livelihoods through a range of projects. And projects such as supporting women-led blue businesses, like the Belize Women Seaweed Farmers Association. Empowering fishing communities. So we have fishing associations in the north, Shanosh, and the Shark Fishers Association in the south, so that they can build their capacity to access funding. And then we've also provided a lot of support to protecting our natural assets through support we give to the various marine protected areas and ensure that the pillar industries like tourism and fisheries have that natural base to keep relying on. So our investment is ensuring that continued economic livelihoods are realized. And we are also looking to the future. So using the blue bonds as the anchor investment, we are planning and working on diversifying the mix of funding by engaging private sector partners and looking at whether it's voluntary fees from the tourism sector or exploring blended finance arrangements or bonds with partnering with the Development Finance Corporation, but also our regular on-granting through our multilateral funds. So that's a quick synopsis of how we are mobilizing blue finance.
All right, thank you. And so to realize that vision that CEO painted, there is a lot of different things that's happening in the background in terms of ensuring that you can mobilize into the blue economy sector, including the planning to know, okay, where will you be able to invest and do business and where you will not be able to invest and do business. But in those areas where you can, the Belize Fund will assist all the different partners, including communities and marine protected area stakeholders, to be able to do that work. It takes, though, a big blend of finance to do that, right? And so I'm glad we have a bill here as well from the Protected Areas Conservation Trust. And I would like to know, Bill, how is PACT, as one of the older funds in Belize, aligning conservation funding with investment opportunities in ecotourism and protected areas management?
Thank you, Valdemar, and good afternoon, everybody. So older funds, I like to say legacy fund.
Legacy fund.
But I think where we are, just in general, in terms of conservation financing, it's a wonderful place to be a Belizean. Almost 30 years ago, there was this revolutionary idea of creating a financial vehicle marrying conservation and tourism to support conservation work in Belize, and that is what PAC is. And over the years, we have invested, we have supported the conservation work that happens in the marinescape and in the terrestrial. But today we are in a different era. We're in a different position where I think we must recognize the importance of what's happening on the blue economy side. If we take a few numbers, for instance, coral reefs, for instance, globally, the value of the economic value of coral reefs is like $10 trillion US. And so there is, just with the coral reef ecosystem, such a huge opportunity to mobilize and to empower economies that need the empowerment, as in the case of Belize, as CEO was mentioning. So I think, Belize continues to be this leader, this innovator over time in seeing how we can transfer what we have as a base and now trying to evolve it into something that is much more. And the track of it, I think, is quite important. So PAC was, traditionally a granting entity, providing that support to NGOs, in particular to our co-managers. But I think what the blue bond and the blue wave is that it now shows that there is an important element of private sector. There's an important element of other types of financing that must be included within conservation financing moving forward. In 2011, PAC, for instance, saw an opportunity similarly with climate resilience. And so it took it on itself to build its capacity and to become accredited. So we have that other element, that other arm of what we do. But today, as it stands, PAC still has the elements of what it originally was thought to be, and that connection between tourism and conservation, and that's still very important. However, to a certain point, because there's also an earlier discussion about whether there's a dependence or an interdependence between tourism and conservation. And we all saw it. For those that are in the tourism sector, we felt it in 2010, 2020, and 2021 with COVID, in that we saw the impacts that dependency may have upon, especially when it comes to the conservation elements of it. But I think that there is opportunity. And if we can change and shift the mindset now, it's something that we've been talking quite a bit about. How do we engage more the private sector in our conservation areas, in MPAs? And I think your situation at the Turnef Atoll is a good example of how you can build those partnerships with the private sector and evolve. How is it that we finance conservation moving forward? And that's what our hope is at PAC, that we can also be a part of that, to be a part of that growing trend that we're seeing in how we can build and using the assets, as was said earlier today, to provide a good investment, a good, smart investment for Belize and for our resources. So the one thing that has always been in the back of my mind when it comes to ecotourism in conservation and in marine protected areas and all of that is how do we create a governance system, a system that allows for accountability and some level of acceptance of responsibilities. And again, I go back to Turnef because you have a great set of resorts, for instance, that you work with, and that you have a sort of a unified approach as to how you want to see the atoll develop from a tourism point of view. But we don't have that everywhere. And I think that's where we as trust funds and as government, we need to propel more of those examples so that we can reach the milestones that we have, the milestones that we have under the Blue Bond, but also the milestones in socioeconomic development that we have for our people.
Thank you, Abil. And that, PACT is one of the legacy models of payment for environmental studies, for environmental services in Belize, right, where the tourism industry has financed the conservation work, but the government was involved in structuring and ensuring that there is an enabling environment to be able to get that done and to get those resources, and that is super important, right? So with that said, I want to as CEO, we are talking about the work in Belize and the work that we need to do in Belize, and how do we structure that across the systems, marine protected area system, but also the general blue space on a whole. But how do you see Belize's economy advancing through regional integration and also trade opportunities across CARICOM and Central America? I think you alluded to some in the Caribbean, and so I'd like to hear a little bit more about regionally, where do you think we're going?
Sure. But before I get into your question, Valimar, I wanted to tie in the interventions from my colleagues here in terms of how do we now have excellent mechanisms like the Belize Fund and PAC now leverage, maximize the national development direction. And I think it's not that we don't have systems or frameworks. There's a national vision. And we have to now see how, as a collective grouping, whether it's through PAC, and I see PAC is already moving along in that direction in terms of accessing these non-traditional funding to PAC, some of the development funding, and even the Belize Fund. How do we align more these excellent mechanisms along the national development path? That is what is important. So I think we have to be a little bit more integrated, and we have to have that necessary interface that is required to successfully realize a responsible and robust blue economy, where all components of that blue economy, important components. And the first thing we have to do is to now have an understanding of how we now see ourselves fitting into the national agenda and the national pathway. It is clear that we are a nature-based economy in Belize. More than 50% of our GDP is based on nature. We have to now look at what are those strategies to ensure sustainability and economic growth. And so we have to start thinking outside the box. So conservation financing, as PAC, I have to give some great praises to PAC, because conservation financing is not just traditionally funding MPAs, but conservation financing might well look at the direction that national development is going, so that we could say, boy, this economic strategy of growth in one direction can now help us to alleviate in our coastal communities the pressure on those very blue assets that we're working very hard to become good stewards of. Or we could say we're now looking at how do we add value to what we're already taking and move away from a production-based strategy to now a more value-added strategy to bring in more income, to do things more sustainable, do things more greener. So I just wanted to say that, because we have to start thinking outside the box, and a lot of times we're stuck in the usual way that we've been moving. We have to see how do we now interface more effectively with MSMEs. I see some of our partners in the back, these women that are doing wonderful things with their lionfish jewelry, or people who are doing excellent things. And I must say that both funds that are sitting here on my right and my left side have recognized that further than that. We've been working with the Development Finance Corporation to do exactly that, to look at the blue economy pathway and the value chain, and to see how we could have more affordable funding available for MSMEs, and how do we now build up from those MSMEs and create more robust, productive sectors. So I just wanted to butt in with that, Valimar. I know
sure.
I know I did throw you off script, but
no, that's fine. I have a question. Don't forget my question number 2. But I have a question in relation to what you're saying here, right? I think it is important for the audience to understand also the vision of the project for finance permanence, right? Because that is what you are now alluding to. Because in this structure, right, and we ourselves have refinanced our impact investment with the Development Finance Corporation. So we move an impact investment we had with Altila Merova and the Sustainable Ocean Fund in the UK, and we brought it to Belize, right? That tells you a big story of what creating the environment has been able to structure, because before we could never take such a thing to a development bank. They would not be thinking in that way. But so I think it is important for you to highlight where are we going with the PFP, what are the pieces that will bring this vision that you're talking about together.
So I will say that the Belize Blue Bond, in my view, is one of the single most transformative deal that has happened to Belize since independence. It was a deal where Belize was able to now move non-traditional private sector monies to look at how it can now restructure its debt, catalyze fiscal recovery, attract excellent interest from private sector or IFIs or bilateral partner to a bigger vision for development, and invest back in our natural capital, which in our space is the basis for our blue economy. But what it has also allowed us to do is to leverage that success now to now create new mechanisms, more results-based financing deal for blue economic growth, for conservation, and that is the Resilient Bold Belize that we're working on, which is our project for finance permanence in Belize. And what that is doing now is looking at what we've achieved under the blue bonds, and it's looking at where are those areas that we need to strengthen. Governance framework, national capacity, livelihoods central to it, to see now how do we now get the kind of return on our investments that we've made over the years and continue to make in conservation to really make a difference in welfare. So it's good for us to say we have $180 million in conservation, but what does it mean at the end of the day to people? And so this government has clearly announced that what we have in Belize, our direction, is a people-centric conservation agenda. And what that means is that we recognize the importance of good stewardship. We recognize the need for us to have functional ecosystems so that they continue to provide the important ecosystem services which provides the basis for our economic sector. But we also recognize that our green space are assets. They are assets that we should look at how we can continue to monetize their services. We should look at how we could leverage all investments that we're making to ensure that we make a difference in terms of people's welfare and the development of this country.
And you're responsible to put together that one hymn sheet that you spoke about earlier, which is the plan, right? That all of us will work towards or finance, depending on where we're going with this. So coming back to Dr. Ricketts, after hearing all that, Dr. Ricketts, and seeing that vision, what role does long-term sustainable financing play in ensuring Belize's blue economy vision? How do we make this achievable? What do you see as your role there?
Well, thank you again, Valdemar. And I think CEO Wade has outlined a clear pathway. And as she mentioned, both funds, we are partners in getting the country towards that pathway. And long-term financing is very important. So yes, the blue bonds provide a base. It's the anchor, and from that we can leverage. And as she mentioned, there's already many opportunities that it has opened the door to. But diversification brings resilience. So it's important we look at how we can diversify. And at the Belize Fund, where we have seen that right away in terms of how we want to invest more in MSMEs, but also exploring blended financing. So by utilizing and leveraging some of the funding from the blue bonds towards de-risking, whether it's other investments, that's some of the initiatives we're discussing with the DFC. And through PACT, we've been looking at partnerships and how we can, in a more coordinated response, mobilize support to marine protected areas, because as Ms. CEO Wade said, that's the base. So diversification is an important part of long-term sustainable financing, and I think we're hearing from the panel that we're all actively exploring that, recognize that need. And beyond this 20 years that we've heard, there is an endowment. So that will continue to take us down that pathway. The country really has a solid base due to the deal that the government had the foresight to implement to take us beyond 20 years. So it's going to take us into the future. And for the fund, it's looking at how we can mobilize that, take that and reinvest it and ensure that it keeps growing for Belize and getting for us. While ocean conservation is important, yes, it's the base to continue supporting tourism, supporting fisheries, building new businesses. I think you spoke about biotechnology, exploring pharmaceuticals from ocean resources. So again, there is a base to support that. And at the fund, we are very interested in looking at how we can support aquaculture, mariculture businesses, and ecotourism. I don't think Belize has done enough with its ecotourism. It can look at more reef positive businesses. And yes, we don't want to fully depend on tourism, but there's still areas for development there, I think, and investment. But I want to end by saying that, put a challenge to the private sector. The government has really made very important and solid decisions for the country in aligning this blue bond. Now, it's time for the private sector to invest. The government has put up and showed it will invest to the tune of, 364 million US. Now we invite the private sector to consider the same and partner with government. And with that, Alan.
Thank you. So all of this leads to a real, a blend of financing, right, at the end of the day. But it has to be community-centered. People, I always tell people, and I told Jamana this earlier, I'm not a conservationist, I'm a peopleist, right? I'm doing this because at the end of the day, this is how it affects people and their livelihoods, right? It is important, right? So, there is a need for public-private partnerships. And here in the Investment Summit, it is important to see how do we leverage, because I think these are the three of some of the key partners that will enable investments into this blue economy. And so now, Bill, with that, I would like to ask what models of public-private partnership have proven most effective in balancing conservation with economic development? I know that a tough one, Bill, and I'll ask the CEO the same thing, because I'm sure she is at the heart of discussing some of these things.
Thank you. I don't think PPPs is a new thing for Belize, and even in some cases in conservation, we talk about ecotourism. It's just a matter of scale, and I think now we're at a point where, as Dr. Ricketts mentioned, we have an opportunity to scale up substantially the level of PPPs that we can have in the marine scape. Earlier today, the banks that were up here were talking about liquidity. They were talking about now they're venturing into ESG frameworks and being able to now connect the languages, at least at the moment, between what we do and what they do. So again, like what Dr. Ricketts said, there is a call that if we have banks, development banks, and even commercial banks, that we are open to having the discussion as to how they can participate in this blue wave, I call it, of conservation in our marine areas. And so I think it's ripe. But like I said, the PPP framework is nothing new. In Belize, the easy draw is to ecotourism and to nature-based tourism. But I'll give you a quick little statistic. So worldwide, nature-based tourism generates about $600 billion every year. Right? How much do you think we invest globally into conservation? Around 10 billion. So there's a 60-to-1 ratio. And some people may call it, well, there's a return on investment of 60-to-1. I look at it in another way. I look at it that there is a disparity in how much we are putting back into our areas. And now we have also recognized that the traditional way of financing is there, but is not at the level where it was in the 90s and the 2000s. And so I think Belize is a good example of how we are putting ourselves up to say that we are willing, we are innovating, but we also need partners to innovate. We also need the larger companies here in Belize, even the bottling companies, to look at, no, it's not marine, but look at the watershed management situation and how they can be a part of that for future prosperity. So these are things that I think are important to mention. Overall, PPPs, I don't think there's one single real model or approach that we can say is successful. It really depends on what it is that we as a country want to have as PPPs. Because you've seen PPPs that are huge. They are $300 million solar or large infrastructure programs. But is that the type of PPPs we want to see in our marinescape? You know, do we want to see wind farms? Do we want to see more invasive type of development? So that I think is key, and I think what we're seeing here is that Belize as a country, it knows what it wants. And now it's developing the vehicles, the PFP, and even looking at how we at the conservation level can improve and make more efficient our governance so that we can speak more efficiently with one another, we can mobilize more efficiently with one another. And I think that really would go a long way. And so I think that as I opened up, we need to think outside of just tourism. There's great work being done in aquaculture, as CEO mentioned. We had a brief discussion with, I don't think he's here, but someone working on a market assessment for seaweed in the country, and some interesting numbers are there, but we have to also recognize that things change quickly, and so if we want to trade, we have to be, I guess, a little bit more efficient in getting that trade out. And it's great what we got with the in the US. But we also are working within an environment where there's a lot of uncertainty. So that's just development for you. But I think there is much more certainty now in the marinescape, and that goes I think a long way for not only us in conservation, not only us in resource management, but for the private sector to feel safe and to know that their investment has a win in the future. And I think that's the main message when it comes to PPP from my end.
All right. As you earlier said, I think TURNF has that PPP with its tourism stakeholders. It hasn't been an easy model. The government is involved, and the government has created actually the enabling environment for us to model that and see how that works. But CEO, can you speak to more of the other areas that the ministry is looking at in terms of public-private partnerships and in the blue space, and where do you see this going?
Sure. So I think PPP are extremely important. And the government recognizes that. It has now created a PPP unit. For the first time in our history, we're now looking at, from a natural asset standpoint, putting in place the various systems that would allow us now as government to have KPIs that are nature-based, KPIs that are ready to be plugged into financing deals with private sector, KPIs that facilitate the kind of PPPs that we're looking at in the blue sector. Government recently signed a PPP for the first time globally for blue carbon for Belize, for the TURNF Atoll, which we're now looking at as a possible scalable model for more approaches to blue carbon. So from the government standpoint, the menu for PPPs is abundant. What we must do now, in our view, is to ensure that the enabling environment is there to accommodate PPPs, whether it's in blue carbon, whether it's in fisheries, whether it's in sargassum. We've been having excellent discussions over this business summit to look at possible PPPs to now address the issue with sargassum that we're looking at, whether it's in conservation financing. So PPPs are now one of the vehicles that we're looking at with a lot of potential. And what we are working on in government is to ensure that the systems are in place so that we have a Ministry of Finance that is equipped with the necessary mechanisms, KPIs, the MRVs that are important for tracking those KPIs, that are important for our bilateral partners, our development partners, in now putting together these very innovative results-based financing deals. So that is where we are with that.
Yeah, and it's interesting, right, that you said, CEO Wade, that the PPPs is one area where you can take a challenge like sargassum and turn it into a business opportunity, right? And you have to include innovation because you need technology, you need to bring everybody together, the community is involved, so and it's leveraging an industry. So that is an important part of all of this. So William, we have 5 minutes for questions.
Yes. 5 minutes firm. Anyone has a question for the panel? Please don't jump up all at once. Can we just get her?
Hey everyone, thank you so much for the panel. I am Dr. Tiara Moore, founder and CEO of an organization called Black in Marine Science. And so I'm really wondering your perspective on just education and how it can play in the blue economy. I'm a marine ecologist with my PhD, and the reason why I started the organization is because it's like less than 2% of Black folks in the marine PhD level in leadership. And I think there's a huge opportunity here for Belize. So what is your perspective on that, of having little Belizean kids dreaming of being marine scientists and actually becoming that here? Yeah, instead of always being in tourism and all that.
You see everybody jumped up here on that question is because stakeholder engagement is a big initiative for us. So, who wants to go first? CEO Wade?
So I'll just briefly say that from the mere fact that the government has identified the blue economy as a pillar in its economic development, it means that education, academia has to be central to that. So I'll leave it at that and allow my two colleagues to talk about it from their perspectives.
Thank you. And to add to that, Belize has, I think in the region has been, while we're small, we always recognize the importance of capacity and capacity to manage our resources. And right within our national university, I'm speaking from a hat I used to wear, they have recognized that need. So there's actually a bachelor's program that looks at marine sciences, training up our young Belizeans to go into those leadership positions. So as CEO mentioned, the government sees it as a priority, and our national university, and I'm sure other universities here also have flagged that as key.
Yeah, so the university sits on our board, for example, of Belize, and one of the visions is to have a world-class marine science and training center on Calabash Key. We already have the foundation for it, and we're moving in that direction because the idea is we want to do it for Belize, but we want to do it for the region and for the world as well, because we have a natural lab out there that we can leverage to all these universities, and that's one of the pathways that we see for the marine space on a whole. Bill?
Yeah, I think that, again, the marriage between tourism and conservation over years has developed quite a bit of successful programs. TASA being one, there's TIDE down south as well that provides platforms and spaces for more advanced level education. But I wanted to say two things. PAC, we currently have a youth academic support grant that we provide to young Belizeans that are at the national universities that want to engage in more environmental science and conservation. And so that has been a program we have had running for quite some time. We're looking at maybe modernizing and tweaking a little bit more, but the importance of being able to provide support to young Belizeans is important. And also, we are working on a program more at the primary school level, because I remember when I was growing up, there were a lot of great programs about not to litter and why the environment is important, and those stuck in my mind. That is why I'm here, really, because of those basic principles that we had. And so we are working also from an environmental point to try to see how we can get that back into the schools, and there's great work that is happening right now. I think there was just a piece of literature that the University of Belize and the government put together for protected area management to kind of enhance their program. So there are some things, but yes, I think we all recognize that we can do much more in terms of education and building that awareness.
Good. So with that, William, we are on time.